All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the last of the four-part cyber seminar series on landing your dream job. As a reminder, this is a collaboration between CUAHSI and H3S, which is the Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee. So we're a group of graduate students that work to provide students and early career scientists in the hydrologic community with opportunities for professional development and networking. So far in this series, we've talked about the pre-application phase, so when to start looking and where, the application phase, including the job documents and interviews, and last week was the post-application phase where we talked a lot about negotiations and that process. And so today we're at the job transition, so really talking about what was it like the first week, the first month, the first year in your new position, and how you navigated it. So we have 4 new panelists this week, and in a second I'll have them introduce themselves. But for a bit of housekeeping, there's a questions box on the tool panel, and so at any point, if a question pops up or if you'd like to discuss something, please put that in the questions box. The first part will be introductions, and we have a few questions to get us started, but it will largely be on the attendees to sort of help us guide the discussion with the panelists and get the most out of it we can. And so I guess with that, we'll start. We'll have the panelists introduce themselves in the order in which they appear on the screen. And we've asked them to talk about their current positions or future positions, sort of how they got there, and then answer 2 questions. The first being, were there any parts of the job transition that caught you off guard? And if so, how you handled it? And then the second question being, is there anything you'd wish knowing going into your position, or anything that you would have done differently now that you're there? And so with that, we can start with introductions.
Okay, am I supposed to start? This is Laura.
Yes.
Okay, hi, so I'm Laura Condon. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arizona in the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences. And before I had this position, I was an assistant professor at Syracuse University, and I was there for about 2.5 years before I moved here, and now I'm in my 2nd year here. So I have a lot of experience with the first year of academic positions in my recent memory. And I think I was thinking about how to answer your questions, and I think maybe the most useful things I could talk about are the things that I found the most helpful, and that when I moved jobs, I did differently the second time around than the first time around. So I thought maybe I would just say a couple things about that. So I think the first thing that is really overwhelming when you start a new position is just the number of people that you meet, and probably everyone's really excited you're there, they wanted to hire you, and there's all sorts of people who have ideas to collaborate with you and things to do with you and all these things that can be really overwhelming. So to just not get too overwhelmed by that, and also not promise and start 10 collaborations in the first week that you appear somewhere, and try to kind of pace yourself a little bit. And another concrete thing to do that I found really helpful at both institutions I was at is to join or form. In both cases, I ended up forming ones with other new faculty member to form a peer mentoring group, because there's so many questions that are really specific to the institution that you're at, that it's just really helpful to have people that are in different departments but navigating the same thing, and just meet every couple of weeks, and you never know, just little things that you can talk to. It's also really important to find senior mentors, but I think they're not quite as good for just all of the little tiny things that happen, especially in the first year. And then I think everyone always says that you need to work on saying no when you're a junior faculty member. But I think the most helpful way for me is not to necessarily say no, but to just say I need to think about it, because I'm better at saying that in the moment, and give yourself time to like make a different answer. And then to also like, it also kind of surprised me the amount of grad students that reached out to me when I first got there. And I think there's a real like danger when you're first starting of ending up kind of like ghost advising a lot of students, because you're like new, energetic, might have time to meet with them more than maybe if they have like a really hands-off advisor. So just being aware of just like all the people that are going to come out of the woodworks and want things from you, and being ready to manage that. And then the final thing I would say is to really like just kind of shift your mindset a little bit about how you're going to get things done, because it's really different than when you're in grad school or a postdoc, that you really just might not have consecutive chunks of time to work on things, to really just like embrace incremental progress. And especially for things like writing, if you can join a writing group or do anything to help you like make sure you're still doing research, but knowing that it might look a little different in your first year especially. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you. That was fantastic. Adam,
All
do you
right.
want to next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the lead off, Laura. I'll follow up by saying my name's Adam Listowski. I'm a consultant at Linker Technologies in Boulder, Colorado. Before I arrived at this company, I was a postdoc at CU Boulder and did my PhD at CU Boulder as well. A bit about my company. Linker is a water resources consulting firm. We help our clients manage risk and plan for the future in a super dynamic and non-stationary world. So a lot of our clients are interested in how climate change might affect their assets, but we help them navigate that. And so what I bring to the panel is, or what I bring to my company is a background in hydrologic modeling, technical communication, and data analysis that I use as needed, again, to help clients. And so as you might be able to tell, I'll be very different from the other panelists in that I'm a consultant. And so I'm very much in the service industry of helping people solve their problems. So I do what people tell me to do if they're going to pay us to do it. And so being in that service industry very much is sort of what lights me on fire. And so reflecting on the two questions that we were asked to think about, the first one really resonated with me, which is, were there any parts of the jobs transition that caught you off guard or that you hadn't prepared for? And the first thing that came to mind was being really rigorous about my time management. I thought I had my stuff pretty together as a PhD student, not really at all time management as a PhD student, and then a little bit more as a postdoc. But now as a consultant, time is money. So I bill all of my time either to a client or to the company. And so if I'm not working for the client, I'm effectively dead weight, because during those hours, I cost more to my company than I'm producing or bringing in terms of revenue. On the flip side, when I'm working on a client-related project, I have an ethical responsibility to be efficient and honest about my time use, because they're paying good money for me to do something for them. And so navigating that balance has really made me very intentional about my time. And so while it was stressful at first, I've really come to love how intentional I can be with my time and the amount of focus that pressure from both ends about being efficient with my time brings to me. And I think that resonates with what Laura was saying. There's a million different things that might be able to distract you. And you got to pick and choose exactly how you're going to spend your time, because time is valuable to everyone that's using your time, but it's also valuable to you, because you want to be able to go home after the day is over and, I don't know, be with your family or be with your friends or get away from work a little bit. So make the most of your time. And I'll save other insights for the later questions. So that's my introduction. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, I think that means I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill McClary. I am a postdoc research associate at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in their School of Freshwater Sciences. And I moved into this position just last year, straight out of my PhD that I finished up in. My background is in environmental engineering. And so in thinking about the transition, I just finished up my first year. And so it's all pretty fresh, and still some of it feels like a transition. I'm going to resonate with some of the stuff that Laura and Adam already mentioned. And the main topic being time, but with a little bit of a different angle. I think one of the things that I didn't necessarily prepare for well, or caught me a little bit off guard, was just the amount of time that was going to be necessary to sort of relearn lab procedures, lab policies, that kind of stuff that makes a research group function. So after 5 years in a PhD program, I was very familiar with how my group operated. I was very familiar with how the department operated. And it took me a little while to remember how difficult it was coming into that at the very beginning of the 5 years, and that I would have to have a similar transition into my new position, especially having sort of switched disciplines from engineering to the natural sciences. There's a little bit more of a just a difference in how labs are operated and the terminology that students and professors use. And so it's been a great process. I feel like I've learned a lot, which was sort of the point of my choosing this position. But also the amount of just time and effort that went into that relearning process was not something I was expecting. And so I think that remembering, it's a little bit of something you can't prepare for per se, besides getting in the right mindset. But I think if I had known or just anticipated that amount of time in the beginning, I could have been a little bit more efficient with how I was managing my time throughout that year, knowing that that was going to be a major factor in the transition.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Crystal?
Yeah, I think I'm last here. So my name is Crystal Ng. I am in my 5th year as an assistant professor at University of Minnesota in the Earth and Environmental Sciences department. So before coming here, I was at the USGS in Menlo Park for 4 years. The first 2 years I was a postdoc there, and then the second 2 years I was a research scientist. And before that, I did my PhD at MIT. So yeah, it's an interesting time to reflect back, because I am now my kind of the end of my assistant professorship. But yeah, I mean, there were definitely so many things that I definitely was not prepared for. And one of the things was I just didn't, I knew there was going to be a lot of work research-wise. I just didn't realize how much there would be administrative-wise, of like figuring out how to deal with budgets, how to deal with the, the purchase card that we get here, who to even ask about these things, how to get students, how to fill out their list of courses and what are their requirements. There was just so much that's not research. And coming out of a postdoc and coming from USGS, I was used to just having to do with that. So that was a huge surprise. Say the other part was actually just politics in the department. I realized how much I was shielded from that kind of stuff as a student, but there's different personalities. I wouldn't say that the politics are bad in my department. I think just every department has them. And, I was on a search committee my very first year of a very contentious search, and I was smack right in the middle of it. Didn't realize that I had that coming. And I guess just maybe one that I probably could have anticipated better, but just didn't realize the magnitude of how it would feel, was just a transition from like really thinking about and working on papers to like, now I'm really focusing mostly on proposals. And that was just, that's not what I felt like I was trained to do when, as a graduate student. Yeah, so I guess what I wish I had maybe done differently to kind of handle those things. So I'll echo a number of the things I've already been said. If I look around, there were some other incoming assistant professors same time as me. I'd say probably some of the more successful ones were ones who found like mentors early on and like a network early on. And I will say I totally agree, having other junior faculty to serve as a support network is important, but I also think that for navigating things like politics and figuring out who to ask about things, having senior mentors was actually really, really important as well. So again, I'm just going to echo like time management. I think figuring out that you have to protect time so that you can actually get things done, but how to sometimes somehow balance that with actually you have the most potential to grow if you can like explore different things and talk to a gazillion people. And so how do you do both? And I think you just have to figure out a way with that time management. And maybe the very last thing that I'll say is with that time management, also figuring out how personal life does fit into that. I myself was going through a divorce my first year, that took a lot of mental energy. Others around me that I know there was someone in my department who had a newborn her first year. I have another friend who found out that her toddler had special needs her first year, and somehow, figuring out how to protect time so that you can take care of yourself, so that you can actually be effective in your work, even when you feel like you don't have the time to do so. I think, and even though you sometimes feel like you don't get to talk about that part, I think somehow that has to be dealt with too, because I think a lot of us are, dealing with personal life issues as well.
Great. Well, thank you. And you all touched on some important thing and follow-up questions that we have. So I guess to start, just sort of talking about what you did your first year. So we have a postdoc and a consultant, and also, early faculty positions. So, what really unique to that position did you do, whether it was a majority of proposal writing and that was different? If that question resonates with anybody, or how, yeah.
Well, I can jump in again. So I think what Crystal just said was like really true of just, I think everyone tells you, and that things are going to be really different when you start a faculty position, but I don't think there's a way to fully prepare for just the number of things that you are going to have to do. And just everything takes so much longer the first time you're doing it. I think exactly, she said, like the first time you're like figuring out what the travel rules are and how to fill out a travel card. And this is like something that Jill mentioned too, of just like learning the procedures of where you're at. I feel like that just takes a huge amount of time. And the first time you have a grad student, figuring out what do you have to do to get them paid? What do you have to do to make sure they're paid the right amount? What do you have to do to like get them through all the steps they're going to get through? So I think it's really hard to underestimate the amount of administrative time, which is really, it's hard to do it any faster the first time through because you just don't know all the things and you have to learn them. So doing that, like setting up a website, setting up like procedures for your group, all of these things take a lot of time. Switching from focusing on writing papers to really focusing on writing proposals, that's a huge amount of time. Hopefully your first semester you might not need to teach a course, but within your first year, odds are you'll be teaching a course or two. So preparing for courses, also hopefully, there's different schools of thought on this. I think it's great if you can have a grad student start when you start, because if that's the semester you're not teaching, at least you're not like starting a grad student and teaching at the same time. But finding new grad students, and it's also really hard when you first have a group because you don't have existing grad students who like know the ropes. So your first grad students take like a lot of energy. So finding grad students, getting them started, and then hopefully figuring out what service you're going to do in the department, meeting people and trying to connect to things across campus, and then also doing research somehow.
All right, I'll follow on from there. So my first year is not over. I will say that first. From my experience, though, in the private sector, consulting work is a balance between billable work, that is working on a project for a client, or business development. So networking, writing proposals, putting in your time to bring new work into the firm. Because if there's no new work to do, then we don't have any work to do, and we're losing money. So it's a bit simpler than what I'm hearing from our academic colleagues on the panel. And so I'd like to zoom out, though, and talk about some of the mental models that I've implemented the first few months I've been with the company in order to set off on the right foot that have worked for me. So the first two concepts are humility and hunger. So I've been very willing to take on any challenge that comes my way, no matter how small and how big. I don't want to promise too much, but definitely not afraid to take on anything that might seem below me, because we're part of a team here. And so whatever I can do to move the ball forward for the company, I want to do. And then I never assume that I'm smarter than anybody else in the room on my team. And that's something that, you know, I sort of, there's a development of ego I felt as a PhD student and a postdoc, always talking about my papers and my proposals and my accomplishments, and throw that all out the window, because if the company isn't succeeding, you're not going to succeed. And so there's a definite team effort that goes on, and then allowing your work to just speak for itself. So no matter how small the task is, do an excellent job of it and show people inside the company that you're capable of doing good work, and so you'll get more of it. And then importantly, showing that to your clients and people outside of the company, you're going to start bringing more work in. And then the other mental model that I touched on is just being consistently enthusiastic for the team that you're on. This is not a solo effort. And so the company is going to win together or lose together. And so, you know, you can't be selfish with your time. So that's sort of the meta level of what I've been doing my first year.
Great, thanks.
I can follow up with that on the postdoc side a little. I know there's other postdocs on the panel, but I think that for me, my first year, I mean, it's a little of what I already talked about. It was the transition to a new lab that took much more time than I anticipated. So my plan for my first year had more stuff on it than I probably actually got done, just because that transition was more than I expected. But my sort of main goal was basically to broaden my skill set and get more experience that would, as a postdoc, lead me to another position, either in research or in academia. We work with a couple of government agencies here too, so there's a few different directions that my career might take me in the future. But my main focus was basically, number one, on finishing my PhD work. I was fortunate in having a PhD advisor that really pushed me to publish the majority of everything that I did before finishing. And so I had one paper still to finish upon starting here that she continued to actively work with me on. So it didn't just fester in the back burner. So we were able to get that out, which is great. I was able to also help out on a couple of grant applications in my first year. That was a big skill set that was lacking from, I felt, my PhD experience, and so was something I expressed initially on arriving in my postdoc, and so I was able to get some of that experience. And I've also basically been prioritizing, you know, my projects that I work on, as well as different professional development activities. So I have been trying to go to more conferences than I did during grad school. I didn't have the opportunity to go to very many in grad school. So I've been to one in my first year, and we'll be going to another in a couple of months. And also to a professional development workshop that I went to over the summer. So I think my first year was sort of focused around transitioning to a new system, finishing up old things, getting into the new stuff, and then just keeping myself active for the sake of keeping my portfolio and application packages sort of more or less ready to go for future positions.
I guess if we're going down the line, yeah, I think I talked a little bit already about kind of some shifts, and I might just summarize by saying I think my first year was a mess. It was a complete mess. I really felt like I had no idea what I was doing, and it was hard. And I think I'm saying this not to scare anybody away, but actually to reassure people that, you know, I don't think my experience was totally unique, and actually things got better when at the very end of my first year, I sort of confided in another assistant professor that, wow, that year was hard. That was something, and I thought he had everything together. And he looked at me and he goes, oh my gosh, yeah, that was really, really hard. And it was like, you thought so too? And when we actually had this realization that, I mean, I think Laura was already saying this, you can't really fathom, you know, I think there are definitely people who come to this position who are way better prepared than me, who already maybe had a proposal, funded in their pocket already. And I definitely was not on that end of the spectrum. But I think once I kind of realized that, where I was though was still in the realm of normal, it kind of like made me realize I could move forward and get past that first year and actually realize that there'd be a network of people to talk with and kind of be like, hey, yeah, there are all these ridiculous administrative tasks that no one tells you about until they're yelling at you because you didn't do it right. We actually ended up starting to we created a Google Doc and we ended up putting notes down of things that we were learning. And then we had other people joining in, other junior faculty, so that we could all kind of consult back to it. And, and this other junior faculty and I, the one who I first kind of confided in, he and I joke about it now. We're like, how come we didn't just tell each other like the first day that it feels hard and we don't know what we're doing, and we could have started this whole list earlier. And and I think I've just learned that it's not that unusual to be in that situation, and actually just kind of realizing that and kind of forgiving yourself for it. Even though I realize what I'm saying is totally unstructured and I don't know what exactly you take out of it to guide yourself. I think it's an important element as well, though.
Yeah, actually, Crystal, I would like to just follow up on what you just said, that I also feel like I don't want to come off as too negative of like, these are all the things I did in my first year of like it being overwhelming. That's like really what I would like for the takeaway to be from what I said too, is just that like, it's just, you can't really fathom it. You can't really prepare for it, and it's going to be a mess. And the thing is that like, it's a mess for everybody. And so to like figure out how you can still I think kind of like what Adam was saying, how you can like keep some mental models in your mind about like, okay, this is what I'm about and this is what I'm doing and this is how I'm going to approach things. And like part of that is I'm going to be like kind to myself and not totally beat myself up when, I find out I've done this totally wrong for the fourth time because it was super confusing and I didn't know and blah, blah, blah. Is like, that's like to me the number one, like just survive the first year kind of. And I think that like what you were saying about finding another junior faculty member, like for me, I found that just because there was a peer mentoring group that I ended up joining. And it was really amazing to me, the people in my group who were at all different levels came into it. Some people had a lot of funding previously, some people had no funding, some people did postdocs, some people didn't. And across the board, people just were struggling, and it was just good to like hear from people that you're like, oh wow, I thought you really had it together. Oh no, you have questions and you're confused and tired too. So I think, yeah, just finding people and not being too hard on yourself, because it's just hard to get everything started at once.
Great. Well, thank you. That's really helpful. Sort of building on that, were there certain qualities about a department or certain things in place at the university that helped the transition at all, that made it a little less chaotic?
Or even worse?
Or yeah.
I'm thinking.
I mean, I think it's like, yes, at different institutions that I've worked at, both through like 2 faculty positions, academic positions, and then I also did consulting and work for the federal government. Like whenever you start a new organization, there's people who are really helpful and people who are not really helpful. And it's like part of when you start a new job is finding the people and finding like who's the person that you need to email who's going to really help you get something done, and who's the person that you're going to email that's going to send you to someone else and you're going to fall down an email black hole. And I think there's like different places do things better or worse than others. I don't know if it's a depressing thing to say, but I'm not sure you can really identify that super well going in per se. I mean, you can ask people in interviews if it's like really a horribly political department where people are feuding and you might want to steer clear. But other than that, like, I'm not sure, you kind of end up where you end up after all of that. And I'm not sure it's like comes so much into your decision-making process. So it's mostly just like, once you get there, like being proactive and finding the people that are going to help you, and not being afraid or feeling dumb about asking for help, to like reach out and be like, hey, this isn't clear, I need to know what to do, which is really hard at first because you feel like, oh, it must be obvious. And a lot of things just aren't, and you just have to be assertive about it.
Yeah, and I think for me, for entering postdoc positions and looking for that kind of job post PhD, it echoes on a couple of things that people have already talked about, but having good mentors in place helps the transition go easier. And that's obviously finding those mentors is different when you're coming in as an assistant professor. But for me, one of the big things that I was looking at in postdoc positions, aside from just research that I wanted to do and skills that I wanted to learn, was the people that I would be working with. And so I thought really carefully about the type of work environment and person that I wanted to be mentored by, going a little off of different experiences that I had in grad school or had seen from other people going into postdocs before me. And so I think that as much as the transition always takes time, my transition has been fairly straightforward. It's been time consuming, but I have a good set of mentors. I basically found a position where I'm mentored by two faculty members, one that's nearing the end of his assistant professorship, so going up for tenure soon, and one that's a senior professor who's been teaching for decades. And so having both of those people and also just enjoying their personalities and their work ethics has allowed me to kind of enter and feel immediately that I can ask either of them any question that I want and that they will give me an honest answer. And so having that resource right away, whether you can find it before you apply for a position or once you arrive, I think is really key to that.
Yeah, so I definitely, well, I've already said it, but I'll just echo it again. Mentors are so important. I think Laura kind of also touched on, though, actually don't forget about staff and like admin staff and other researchers, because often they're the ones who actually know the answers to things. And they sometimes are a little bit more, have more time also. I think your mentors, your peer mentors, your faculty mentors are also really, really busy, and sometimes it's going to be like an admin staff or a staff researcher who's actually going to have more time to sit down with you and explain something. So, there's insights from mentors that you'll only be able to get from kind of, other faculty mentors if you're in a faculty position. But, I think, like I was saying before, I think the piece that I just didn't think so much about is just how much administrative work there is. I still haven't figured it all out. And you're going to end up spending a lot of time, or ended up spending a lot of time, like sitting with my accountant or the grant administrator, or like the person who runs the lab, to actually find out like how things work around here.
It's possible that some of the folks listening are transitioning from a university as a postdoc or a PhD student into a company or a government agency, and not necessarily to a different university. And I think in those situations, and really in all transitions, understanding the value of communication and learning to be an effective communicator with people around you could make your transition a lot easier, and has definitely the capacity to do so. In my case, our office is 11 people, right? So it's really small. And so I've learned to listen and understand how best to communicate with all of my colleagues, because I have worked in some capacity collaboratively with everybody in the office. You don't have the option at a small company to close your door and opt not to engage with another person, because there's more work than there are people to do it. And so everyone works together on multiple projects, often one project to the next in the same day. And the better you can learn to navigate personal relationships with people in the office, the smoother your time is going to go. And I think at the core of that is listening and being perceptive of how people respond best to how you say the things you say, what you're saying, and listening because you want to know what can I contribute to make the most impact immediately, and again, help the team. So for me, it's communication and listening.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I don't mean to just focus on academia, so it's nice, Adam, to have you here with us to give us a different perspective. So going back to something that actually Jill touched on a bit, thinking about finishing undone work, so either as you transition from your PhD to a postdoc or to a consulting company or an academic position or a faculty position, how did you finish that undone work? Or did you have time to, or did it go to the back folders in your computer? And do you have any advice on how to do that?
Well, this is Crystal here. So I guess maybe one thing I'll caution about. So I did spend a fair amount of time my first year finishing up past papers because I felt like I already sank so much time into them. I better get them out. And that was important. But also, and I think this will depend on where you are and how you're being evaluated. So one thing that I learned when I got here is that if I have papers for my tenure review, if I have papers that are coming out that are from past work, there's no numerical formula in my department. It's all subjective, which is both great and terrifying. But what I'm told is kind of in this subjective formula, I get less credit for papers that are on past work if they're with past collaborators, if they're with past advisors. And so they're like, yeah, having those papers are better than 0 papers. But I definitely, maybe in one other project I could have squeezed out another paper from a past project, and I actually ended up deciding not to do so. I wish I had actually made the decision earlier because I sank a bunch of time thinking I'd move it forward, but when it looked like it was still going to take a bunch more work, and I was getting basically advice about how that would be evaluated for my tenure case, I guess I felt like just I have so little time, I had to make a decision. So part of it is I think it's important to find out early on, like how you're going to be evaluated.
Also to follow up on Crystal said, so I think that I've also gotten that impression, and I think that's an important thing to consider if you're transitioning to a faculty position, of making sure that you're prioritizing time to do your own work. I would also say from the other perspective of it, of being a faculty member who is hiring postdocs and hiring grad students, some of which have previous research going on, or having students that are graduating and going to jobs in academia or in industry, that I think people always underestimate how hard it is going to be to finish things up once you leave the place where you're doing it. Because you're like making progress and it seems like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. I'm going to start this new job. Don't worry. Like, I'm still going to finish that paper with you. Or I'm hiring people who are coming in who are still, not everyone has necessarily PhD advisors who are having them publish along the way. So they've got a whole bunch of publishing to do when they get there. And I think if you can prioritize finishing the things you're doing while you're with the people you're working on doing them, and you have all the resources and everything is set up, it's just like, I don't know, like it just is so much harder somehow when you're apart. It doesn't seem like it would be, but like it's harder to schedule meetings, and it turns out you have the data on the computer at the other place and not at your computer here, and XYZ. So it's like, it just ends up being a lot more disruptive than you might think it would be. And so I've just seen that go a lot of different ways in people that I advise and hire, or how it goes for them when they leave. So I think if anything you can finish up when you're in the place is good.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I think that I spent my first few months in this position finishing up one of my last PhD papers, and I think it worked well, and I wanted to get it out, and it's now a publication that is completed, and that's great, and so it worked well. But I remember leaving my PhD thinking it's basically ready for submission. And then it took another few months at least to get it all together. So it wasn't that much work because it was so close, but it was still more than expected, and it took longer than expected to get it all done once I started a new position and once I had moved, across the country and farther from the people that I was working with on it. And so I think if I had had more to finish up, it could have been, I wouldn't be done by now, probably. And so I definitely see that, it's depending on the weight of what it is you're doing, getting that stuff out and making sure you get it done can be great, but also try as hard as possible to get as much as possible done before starting a new transition.
Yeah, and I would second on that. Just opt for, if you're debating like, should I get 2 papers almost done or get 1 paper actually done, get 1 paper actually done. And then if you do still have time in your new position and you want to like keep going on it on the side and stuff, that's a lot less stressful than having 2 papers in the half done part.
Yeah, this question cuts to the core. It's quite timely for me right now. So I'm in a position of wanting to finish my postdoc publications and having no incentive to do that professionally. There's no tenure review for me. There's the clients who we're working with probably don't care a lot about the nuanced subject matter of my PhD and postdoc research topics. However, I can assure you that if you have a conscience, you're not going to sleep well at night if you just blow off all those responsibilities and put your head in the sand, which is all too easy to do. So for those of you considering a transition to industry, you're not going to have, your company's not going to pay for your time likely to finish your publication. So you're going to have to carve out some plan to get some amount of work done after hours or before hours that you're on the clock. And so for me, I've had to just be really intentional about saying, all right, tonight I'm going to put an hour of my time into this paper. I'm going to move the ball a little bit down the field, and enough of that with some chip in from your co-authors and some enthusiasm and real collaboration from your co-authors, you're going to get the ball, across the goal line, so to speak. But it's challenging, but again, you won't sleep well at night if you just blow off your responsibility to people that you develop real relationships with, in the positions you were at before the fancy new one you've got.
Great, thanks. So a little along those lines, but then now thinking about your current position work, how soon did you feel pressure to either publish postdoc work or write your own proposal, whether it's in the consulting field or in a faculty position? Did that start day one? You should have things going, or do you have any insight to that?
I can start off on this one, I guess. So at what point did the pressure, I think it depends on the person. It depends on the person in the position. I had set myself and now that I'm thinking back on it, it's like crazy. I think when I started my postdoc, I was like, I'm going to publish my last PhD paper, and then I want 2 more postdoc papers within a year. And that was not really possible. So I got my PhD paper out, and then I was a co-author on one other with my advisors, which is great, and my publications are still going well, but I don't have a first author out of my postdoc yet. And so for me, the pressure set in pretty right away, just because I really wanted to reach that goal, and it seemed, with all the transitional stuff, that it wasn't going to happen. But it really, I think, depends on, sort of where you're going afterwards. And then as far as, as a postdoc, I came into a project that had already started. I wasn't on a fellowship where I had developed my own research idea yet. And so near the end of my first year, I've been applying for more grants and fellowships that are on my own research ideas. And so that kind of thinking sort of settled in at about the 1-year mark, where I've been applying to much more of those types of things and trying to better organize my own research ideas. So that's how sort of the timeline worked out for me.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I would say for a faculty position, I don't know how to answer that question without being like a little bit depressing, but I mean, it's kind of like the minute you accept that job, you are starting a clock. And so it's really about how you like if you see that as pressure or not, or if you see that, I mean, obviously there's some pressure and stress associated with it, but there's not really like oh, now I have to get started. It's like, I wish I had started yesterday, more of that thing, I would say. And once you have accepted a position, you're able to apply, usually submit proposals under that university's name. So like even before you start, you can have start submitting proposals, which they're really good at helping you do that part, right? Like, here's how you can submit proposals for our university. So I think the like submitting proposals and writing papers, that just kind of like never stops in an academic position, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's like really depressing pressure. I mean, hopefully you take that job because there's things you're really excited about doing, and that's why I decided to take the job I have, because there's things I wanted to do. So like, yes, it's not fun necessarily to always write proposals and papers, but they're about things that I care about, and I get to have my own ideas and all of those things. So yeah, there's kind of like pressure all the time to keep going, but it should also be aligned with what you're doing and your goals, and to try to make sure that what you're doing is aligned with your goals, so it doesn't just feel like just a tenure clock, because if not, like, why are you doing it?
Yeah. Thanks.
That statement. I just want to follow up quickly on what Laura said. Ask yourself why you're doing things. When I hear that, I get the sense of there's two different types of pressure. There's external pressure and internal pressure, and we should all have an internal pressure to do good stuff, right? To improve yourself. In industry, there's varying degrees of external pressure that, say, company or a management structure may put on you. But oftentimes it might be the case that the expectation is that you put in your 40 hours of work, you punch the clock, and you go home. I personally feel an internal pressure to do more, right? To go above and beyond, do better work than I think I'm capable of doing, and to bring in business to the company. And so for me, my experience has been in the first year, the expectation on a new consultant to bring in new work is really low, minimal. But that shouldn't mean that you shouldn't feel that pressure. I think if you're driven to grow and advance yourself professionally, you'll feel that pressure and you'll act on it. Right? You'll do the things that need to be done. You'll network. You'll go get beers with people. You'll go to conferences. You'll communicate with folks, and just be more motivated by the internal pressure than the external pressure, because the internal will make you thrive, and the external pressure will suffocate you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. That's a really good way of, I wasn't as articulate about that, but I think that's really the difference I was trying to say, is it's like your internal drive, and of course there's external pressure too, but there's external pressure, like Adam was saying, and no matter what position you take, there's things that they're going to want from you, and no matter what job you take, that's going to start kind of right away, because they hired you for a reason. So it's really about how you, Adam used the term mental models, like how you internalize that and think about what it is you're doing and why.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we're getting to the end. There's 10 minutes left. Something that all of you have touched on. So thinking about work-life balance and your first year, and how did you maintain work-life balance, or did you, or do you have, any thoughts on how you should have and maybe didn't?
Well, I didn't. I guess is my short answer. Sorry, go ahead if somebody has something
No,
more productive to say.
no, you go ahead, Crystal. It's fine.
I would say I definitely, one of the things I did not have figured out was work-life balance. I guess I still don't know if I have it figured out. And I think maybe I already said it, but just I'm realizing that that's just part of what you have to work into your time management. And it's so easy to feel like it needs to all be work because, well, just what the last conversation was about is we have this pressure, and but it really just doesn't help. You can't be in a frame of mind where you get to remember why you're excited, like why, the title of this webinar, right, is like landing your dream job. Like, if you can't remember why this is your dream job, then it is just going to be what Laura is saying, that it could just sound miserable or depressing, I think is what you were saying. Maybe the one very small concrete thing, I don't know if this is really totally work-life balance, but I actually just realized prioritizing sleep a little bit more goes a long way. So you feel like you don't have enough time. So I know my choice was just to cut out sleep, but then you don't work as well. You can't handle the personal life disasters as well. And it kind of starts spiraling. You start realizing that, okay, you cut your losses. The lecture is not going to be perfect, but you're actually going to get a little bit of sleep. And all of a sudden you realize you can kind of just punt during your lecture way better with some sleep. And you can handle all the personal things that are going on in your life a bit better too. So maybe that's one concrete thing I'm still working on, but try to get a little bit more sleep.
Yeah, I second Crystal's comment about, I think sleep is really commonly, and in talking to my peers too, like one of the first things that we cut out. And it's just like so important for like mental health and your ability to just think on your feet and respond to things in the way you want to respond to them. So if you can prioritize sleep, and that's something that I'm working on too, that's like really important. And also I think something is like, I mean, we talk a lot about work-life balance, but I think it's also, you have to give yourself permission too when you're starting a new job that maybe your life isn't going to be really super balanced at first. That maybe what you're doing is you're figuring out a transition and things aren't going to be great. It's going to like be messy. It's going to take more of your time. And not to say that you're not going to work towards work-life balance, but if you can communicate with the people in your life, your partner, your kids, whatever, about like, okay, right now I actually have to focus on this for a little bit, for, a couple months are going to be bad, and I need to, be honest in advance that I'm not going to be the best at balancing work and life for a little bit, and then work your way back to that. Or, I mean, I don't know, for me, even it's still just cyclical. Like when the semester starts, I just know that like my life is not going to be super balanced as hard as I try. But then I try other parts of the year to really make sure that I have better balance. So I think it's always a struggle, and it's being conscious of it and trying to communicate as best you can.
Great, thank you.
I'll chime in on work-life balance real quick. I think
Awesome.
you'll go crazy if you don't have work-life balance. And two ingredients that I implement for my personal strategy is exercise and friendships. So I prioritize time to move myself every day. Often that's riding my bike to work and back, which is simple enough. And also to be around friends and develop relationships with people outside of the office, because it's always good to laugh and be a part of a community. And then those things help you be better at work, and just make time because it feeds back into your work.
Yeah, and just a really quick follow-up for me too. I think that, depending on the position you move into and the environment that you're in, work-life balance can look really different. And so it's really about defining that for yourself. I mean, work-life balance doesn't have to mean that those two things are equal. They just have to feel right, and that changes. A lot of research is cyclical, and so some periods are very busy and some are not. And I think that when you decide that that's okay, and also having support structures outside of work to allow you to make that okay, then work-life balance can it's never easy, but it can happen. And I think the thing for me was really just deciding that I was going to enjoy my postdoc. Like I'm going to like it really a lot, because pieces of grad school were great and pieces honestly didn't love them. And so my big thing in moving into my postdoc was I'm going to really enjoy this experience. And so if I'm doing things and I'm working really hard, but it's something that I know I want a skill in, or it's something that I'm enjoying doing, then it's worth it. And if it's not, then I'm still not good at saying no to those sorts of things, but I'm getting better at recognizing when they occur, and then knowing that my main priority is enjoying what I'm doing right now. It makes it easier to say no for personal work-life balance type reasons.
Thanks. So we have one question from an attendee that's asked if there were any books, guides, or blogs with general tips for new faculty. If anybody have anything specific.
One resource that's applicable to all people is a blog called Farnham Street, Farnam Street. It's just a bunch of good life advice that helps you balance work and life, be more efficient with your time, be more effective at whatever it is you're doing. Check it out.
Thanks, I've never heard of that. All right, so I guess with that, we'll start to wrap up. I know you all worried about sounding depressing, but I know I'm actually more excited about the next stage at this point. And so I think we have one more slide with some information on CUAHSI, but yeah, so Ainsley, do you want to take that away, or?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take over here. So just a couple announcements, some things coming up on CUAHSI side. We do have another fall Cyberseminar series starting actually next week, so October 2nd. And you guys can find more information about that on our website, or if you have specific questions, you can always reach out to me and I'll be happy to help. And then we also have 2 fellowship opportunities coming up. The deadline's coming up October 11th, so I think that's in 2 weeks. And if you guys have any specific questions on that, John Pollock can help you all. And again, there's more information on our website about both of those, including how to apply.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists and all the attendees for sticking with us through these 4 weeks. I think this has been a really successful series, and so thank you to the panelists and all the panelists for taking the time in your really, really busy early career stages. I know I certainly appreciate hearing from you all. And so with that, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to add, I'll close for today. And actually, this is the end of the series. So one thing to follow up, we've taken notes throughout the past 4 weeks, and so we'll be posting those. And if you follow us on Twitter, we'll let you know when they're out. So, the blog or some of these things that have come up throughout the 4 weeks, you can have. All right, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.